I'm so happy to see you all here in the day after spring break, almost still spring break, I think, for many of us, and I'm so happy that we're here. We could all be somewhere else right now, but we're choosing to be here. I want to just begin by thanking the Dean's Office for their incredible support of a number of initiatives here at Columbia, including the Mindfulness Program and the Leadership Initiative. This event is sponsored by the Columbia Law School Mindfulness Program and the Leadership Initiative at Columbia Law School, the Center for Institutional and Social Change, and the Mindful Law Students Association. It is an incredible honor for me to introduce our speaker tonight. Sujatha Baliga, I will do a formal introduction of, but I will say that she is one of the people I know who shines so brightly that I just count myself fortunate to have known her, to catch some of those rays over now many years. And to, on more than one occasion, get to hear her speak. And so to introduce her is an incredible honor. Sujatha Baliga's work is characterized by an equal dedication to survivors and people accused of crimes. She speaks publicly and inside prisons about her own experiences as a survivor of child sexual abuse and her path to forgiveness. She's a former victim advocate and public defender in New York and New Mexico. She was awarded a Soros Justice Fellowship in 2008, which she used to launch a pre-charge restorative juvenile diversion program in Alameda County. Through the Restorative Justice Project, Sujatha Baliga helps communities implement restorative justice alternatives to criminalization. She's also dedicated to using this approach to end child sexual abuse and intimate partner violence. Sujatha is a frequent guest lecturer at universities and conferences. She's been a guest on NPR and The Today Show. The New York Times Magazine and The Atlantic have profiled her work. She earned her AB from Harvard College, her JD from the University of Pennsylvania, and she's held 2 federal clerkships. So for anyone who thinks that doing a clerkship means that you have to just become part of the system, or it's only something for people who are trying to jump through hoops for their own sake. It is not and need not be those things. Her personal and research interests include the forgiveness of seemingly unforgivable acts, survivor-led movements, restorative justice's potential impact on racial disparities in our justice system, and Buddhist notions of conflict transformation. A longtime Buddhist practitioner, she's a lay member of the Gyuto Foundation, a Tibetan Buddhist Monastery in Richmond, California, where she leads meditation on Monday nights. Is it okay to say that you have a book that you are writing?
Sure.
On forgiveness that I believe is going to change the world? And I hope to be the first reader of it. It is a great honor to introduce Sujatha Baliga.
Thanks for coming out, folks. Really appreciate it. I know it's just after spring break, and people probably have a lot of things that they need to be doing, and so it's good to see people out on a Monday night. So I was going to start with a little bit of breath observation, but since people are chewing, maybe we can do some mindful eating instead. So I'm going to get my food so I can do it with you. And this is something, I had this incredible honor. Several years ago, a friend of mine who started working for Google in the Googleplex itself, at the main campus, felt like, they're really conflicted about what they were doing with their life. I'm going to push this away. I think it gives feedback that way. Yeah. And they had just started practicing meditation, and they got a notice that Thich Nhat Hanh was going to come to the Googleplex and do mindful eating with Googlers, Google people. Is there a term for Googlers? Googlers? Is it Googlers? So Thich Nhat Hanh, and she got to bring a person And so she said, do you want to come eat with Thich Nhat Hanh? I was like, yeah, yes, I do actually want to come eat with Thich Nhat Hanh. And so we got there weren't even rows because there wasn't even that many people who came. I don't understand exactly you would think everybody in that huge place would come and eat with Thich Nhat Hanh. And so we spent some time learning how to eat, how to chew, how to taste our food, how to be in love with the present moment with gratitude. And so let's just spend a couple minutes doing that. How's that sound? So let's take a moment, if you're chewing now, to just clear out your palate and put your utensils down or in your bowl, and just have your mouth empty and the food in front of you. And let's take a moment to be acquainted with our breath for a second. So just in a gratitude kind of way, just remembering that our breath is our constant friend and will be with us until the moment that we pass away, and is an extremely honest and non-judgmental friend. The breath tells us how we're doing without any judgment. So just let yourself drop into the natural pace of your own breath. Maybe you feel it at your belly. Or maybe you feel your breath coming and going in your nostrils. Or just under on your upper lip. And just allow your breath to be what it is. Now let's take a moment to just look at our food and see what colors you see and what textures. Maybe if your face is close enough to your food, maybe you smell your food. And now let's take a moment to pick up our utensil that we're using and see if you can feel the sensations in your hands as you touch your utensil. And notice what you feel when you use your utensil to pick up some of the food onto your fork or your spoon. And now notice in your mouth if your mouth has begun to water. And as you bring your fork towards your mouth, just take a moment again to smell and observe. And as you place the food in your mouth, again, see what all you notice, in what parts of your mouth, what textures, what flavors. And as you begin to chew, just notice what that feels like and how the textures change, how different parts of your tongue are doing different things and noticing different things. And as you swallow, see what you feel there as well. But take your time chewing. Really just let yourself be with what it is that's happening in your mouth. And so before we move on, let's also just take a moment to be grateful for what is in the bowl in front of us, and just thinking about all the hands that were involved in the production of this meal, all the labor, including the itty bitty bugs that till the soil and all of the little bacteria and things that let things grow, right? And the hands that harvested the food and placed it on trucks and drove it, and the grocery stores and the all the places where these things got processed and chopped up and cooked. All of those people. When we eat this, we are connected to all of them. And let's take a moment to be really grateful for all of them as well. So enjoy your food. Do keep talking eating as I talk. So I'll start with just a little bit about what is, so tonight, so a couple years ago I came and I did a talk on the nexus of mindfulness and restorative justice, and so rather than replicate that, although I recognize that it's a whole new set of people, every 3 or 4 years in institutions, instead of replicating that, it was wonderful. I can't remember if it was Liz or Susan. Together, we maybe came up with the idea of doing this as a more experiential workshop. And I'm really grateful for that, especially because on Monday nights I'm usually teaching, leading meditation at my Buddhist center. And so this is a way I kind of get to mix a little of that in on a Monday night here. So we are going to be doing some little exercises together as this evening progresses. But I do want to start with a little bit of introduction on restorative justice and a little bit of an introduction on mindfulness, and from there we'll move forward. So I'm wondering who, if by a show of hands, has read something about restorative justice? Pretty much everybody. And who is practicing restorative justice? Quite a few people as well. Wonderful. And just a very high-level overview. So restorative justice, I'm definitely in the camp of practitioners who believes that restorative justice is a paradigm shift. And rather than asking the questions that Howard Zer's called the grandfather of restorative justice, and really a seminal thinker in Western expressions of restorative justice, drawn from his own roots in the Mennonite community, thinking about what is covenant justice, in a sense, is what he writes about. And the paradigm shift that, as he thinks about it, is rather than asking the questions of a punitive or retributive legal system, asks such as what law was broken, who broke it, and how should they be punished. Restorative justice asks a very different set of questions. It starts with who was harmed, and what do they need, and whose obligation is it to meet those needs. And so it really sort of shifts the entire thing towards healing and solutions, and starting with those who've been harmed. And I think in its most enlightened forms, restorative justice really asks us to consider that those who cause harm are also harmed people. And that there's not this tidy line that we can draw down society between those who have caused harm and those who have experienced it, and especially for those of us who can acknowledge that I myself have caused harm and experienced harm, and so I don't like to draw that line down the center of myself. And so, I think why I'm drawn to this as a Buddhist is that, the basis of my mindfulness practice is that I am Buddhist, but I also do really value the secularization of meditation practices. I think that there are things that we can gain from, that anyone can gain from practicing some of these practices. I think we have to be careful about appropriation, and when we strip things of their original intentions and roots and values, there's a danger that we not only appropriate, but we also and take credit and don't give proper attribution to where things come from, but that we also often lose the best of it. So the degree to which we strip things down may actually result in the thing being not at all what it can or was meant to be. And so I have to worry about this both in my restorative justice work, which I have learned from so many different indigenous people, and in things that come from my own cultural background and faith practices, right? So this is a very interesting place to sit. So in mindfulness, restorative justice is really a challenging thing to define, and Justice Robert Yazzie, the former Chief Justice of the Navajo Nation, who's a mentor of mine, says it's undefinable. And he watching him and Howard Zer debate about, Howard is very particular about us understanding what it is, so that it can't be appropriated, so it can't be watered down, so it can't be co-opted by systems that actually operate in very different ways from restorative justice. And while Justice Yazzie definitely shares that concern, he also thinks that it is a way of life that is truly transcendent of any kinds of boundaries or boxes. And so this is the challenge, and sort of trying to find that place in the middle of the two is something that I'm going to be talking about a bit tonight. So, and in its space, I think it's difficult to talk about because both restorative justice and mindfulness are things that are difficult to describe and they simply need to be experienced. And so when people say, can you tell me, what's the high-level overview so that I can go implement this policy? And I say, not until you've sat in circle for a few years, right? Not until you've actually tried this with your own family. Before you go fix some other, community that you think is broken. And so these are some of the challenges, I think, both with mindfulness. I know a lot of mindfulness instructors or people who want to be mindfulness instructors who sat their first meditation course, like 5 minutes ago. And I really think that we need to have more humility around all of these practices. And the challenge of trying to describe mindfulness really is, I just would go back to what was the experience of tasting the food in your mouth and just being present with it. I don't think there's a better way to define it. And it is a paradigm shift as well, maybe an even more radical one than restorative justice calls us to, particularly in this time is money kind of life that we're all living in. That being in the here and now is a really, really amazing thing. And to be fully present with the people that we're standing in front of, that we are spending time with the words we're hearing, with the music we're listening to, with the texture of our bed sheets, to be really present is a truly radical thing in our fast-paced life. So, and also to be with non-judgmental a presence to the here and now, this non-judgmental attention, rather, to the present moment. This is a tall order and a big shift for the way in which we generally operate, or I should say I generally operate. So, a little bit about why it is that I chose to do this, what I call restorative lawyering, sort of in tandem and adjacent to the criminal legal system. To my mind, again, I am of the camp that says that punitive and retributive processes are inherently oppositional to the essence of what restorative justice is. And this creates challenges when we still have to contend with the fact that there is an existing system and that we want to help folks that are already in that system, right? Or that are already being processed through that system, or folks who need to rely on those systems for some semblance of security and safety. And so this is a real challenge in the work. And it calls me to the best of what I think my meditation practice asks me to do, which is to eschew binaries, to let go of dualistic thinking. And not easy when we're dealing with things like rape and murder and child sexual abuse and the incarceration of children and rape of incarcerated children. And this is sort of the world I live in, and or I don't personally live in anymore, but I live in it in my work, and these are the folks I'm walking with. And so to try to transcend dualistic thinking in that context is really a challenge. And so my daily practice every morning on the cushion is really the only way I get through it. And so in part, it's infused in the sense that it is the way I start my day and it's the way I end my day. And hopefully everything in the middle can benefit from what it is that I gleaned on the cushion earlier. So one of the things that's been most influential to me, one of the most sort of striking things that I learned as a Buddhist are simply these words that are in the Heart Sutra, which is form is emptiness, emptiness is form. And well, I'm not going to go into the meaning of that because that's way beyond my understanding. Just the words themselves really were incredibly remarkable to me. It just felt like this biggest aha, like wake-up moment. I first heard it in Sanskrit, and it was so beautiful in Sanskrit. And then when I heard it in English, it had a whole other beautiful meaning to me. And I liked the way in which it felt totally simultaneously true and utterly oppositional. And I think there are ways in which restorative justice, when practiced at its best, allows for these uncertainties, and from those uncertainties to allow those, for us to create spaces in which people who are directly impacted by the harms that we are talking about have the space to grapple with the unknown about the best way forward, but to create spaces that are safe enough for us to start to explore the best way forward, right? So restorative justice at its best is saying what has happened is utterly unacceptable, and we're going to pull you closer to figure out how we move forward in a good way, right? And you know, generally speaking, many of us who have done things that are utterly unacceptable are sent to the principal's office and then to detention by ourselves or to out and away, right? And Kay Pranis, who's one of my teachers in restorative justice, talks a lot about there is no out or away we can send people to. And, you know, science has taught us this. It's like trash, right? Like we've learned that when we throw things out, where are they going, right? And when we treat people that way, it's the same phenomenon, right? There is a landfill somewhere, and we are in the same world with that landfill, and there are oceans filled with our plastic. There is no way to send things through. And when we start to figure out how to shoot things into outer space, you know, where we may actually need to move to not too long from now, right? We're still going to have to deal with that trash that we created floating by, right? And this is in no way to imply that any human is trash. If anything, my life's work is about helping us see that even people like my father who sexually abused me, it's even toxic to say the word, continue the sentence, right? That rather, I will say that he is a human who has dignity, and that my work is for us to see us all as having dignity. And that starts with myself, right? And so this is a great challenge. And one of the things that I really love is this, I wonder if I can use this chalkboard. Yeah, there's this thing that I learned about recently. There's a website that folks should look up. It's called the Vent Diagram, V-E-N-T. Has anybody explored this Vent Diagram? I love this thing. It's not Venn diagram, it's Vent Diagram. And so the idea is that they say, the creators of this thing say, we define a Venn diagram as a diagram of the overlap of two statements that appear to be true and appear to be contradictory. We purposefully do not label the overlapping middle. And so here we have, what do we have? We have something really important for me to learn early in my practice on capital cases is this notion that everything I do matters. Everything I do matters on this case. And in the end, nothing I do on this case matters. Right? And if I'm here, I'm going to actually end up dead. And if I'm here all the time, I can lose sight of my client's best interests, right? And in the end, I could still do my everything, and the judge will do what they do, or the jury will do what they do, right? And this is really hard to hold these two truths. And this is something that we are not comfortable with, particularly as attorneys, right? Like, this is not a comfortable place to live. Other things, right? The urgency of now with the patience of 1,000 years, right? We have to have both of those things, right? Like, I desperately would love to see the end of juvenile incarceration, the end of child sexual abuse, the end of all incarceration. I would like to see all of these things in my lifetime. And I'm working as if I could do that, but I'm also working with the long view of the 1,000 years, right? And we have to do both of those things. Another one is, anger is killing me, and anger motivates my good work sometimes, right? And so how do we hold those things, and how do we hold that space in the middle? And for me, it really is sort of breathing into those spaces and honoring those spaces. Pema Chodron talks a lot about, there's a book that she's written with the title Comfortable with Uncertainty. And when I walk into a restorative justice process, I have done my best to prepare all the parties for all the things that might happen without being a shuttle mediator, right? I want people to speak to each other directly, not have spoken through me. And when I create the safest container that I possibly can for people to be as real as they possibly can be, including some legal mechanisms that need to be put in place so that the information in there isn't discoverable or usable in a court of law, et cetera. I do everything I can to make a safe container for dialogue. And then I have to just trust that the folks in that circle are going to say what needs to be said. I talk a lot in prep, and I say very little in the circle itself. And it is always remarkable to see what gorgeous thing people produce. And sometimes it is very transactional. And sometimes it is incredibly moving to see someone get up and spontaneously walk across the circle to hug the person who took their child's life. Any of those things are gorgeous outcomes to me when people figure out how to move forward in a good way. So, I would really encourage people to be compassionate with themselves about the beauty of the not knowing mind, especially as lawyers. It really does fly in the face of legal training. And really, particularly as it relates to the things we ourselves have suffered, right? Anger is killing me, right? And I want to be rid of it. But it motivates my work. Sometimes I think I need like 3 or 4 or 5 circles in my Venn diagram, right? What's the place in the middle of the 5, right? And then anger is an incredibly healthy response to, anger causes heart disease, right? People are saying, right? And anger is a really healthy response to child sexual abuse. Like, both of those things are true, right? How do we hold those spaces? So I'm going to ask folks to do a little exercise, and then after we do the exercise, we're going to have more dialogue about some of the things that I've said, if that's all right. We're going to hand out some Post-it notes. Maybe if I could get a couple people to help me out to pass out Post-it notes. We're going to ask people to take 3 of each color. So you need 3 of each color of these Post-it notes. I think that's it. It's 3 of each color. Yeah, you're going to need 3 of 4 different colors. So we're going to be going through a little bit of an exercise here where I'm going to be asking you to think about, you're going to ultimately be in pairs. And you're going to be in pairs with people you probably do not know. And I'm going to ask you to think about a time when you've been harmed. And I want to assure you that you will not have to share the details of that harm with someone you do not know. My Venn diagram on this was that, I want to protect people from sharing something that the other person may not have the capacity to hold. On the other side, doing exercises with decontextualized harms, right, where we're going to have broader things and more elevated learnings, is apolitical and can be problematic, right? And so just naming that Venn diagram on this, and I myself chose for this particular event to err on the side of being a little bit more protective of folks who don't know each other, with the hope that you will go try this at home You know how they say, like, don't try this at home? I'm like, do try this one at home. And I often say, like, don't go run off and think you're a restorative justice person who can hold murder cases after this 1-hour talk, right? But this, what we're doing today, is something I would love for you to do with people in your lives. I think it's a really great exercise to do with your partners, your lovers, your friends, your kids, your coworkers, right? These are things that can really be beneficial. And in part, this decontextualizing of the harm is a starting point maybe for a conversation. And I understand its shortcomings, for sure. So, when you have your Post-it notes, I'm going to ask you to choose your, to grab, you're going to take the yellow and the blue ones first. And let's close our eyes and get re-centered, if you want to close your eyes or keep them open, whatever's most comfortable for you. And let's get just, again, re-centered with our breath. Just take a moment to find your breath as your anchor. And just notice where it is in your body that you're feeling tension. And just breathe a little bit into those places. Maybe you need to adjust yourself, roll the shoulders, or let your neck move around a little bit. And then, I want you to notice, again, the soles of your feet and the palms of your hands. Sometimes when you're thinking about something, the experience can be overwhelming, and sometimes it's really beneficial to just notice or even rub your hands together. It's a way to ground yourself. Feeling your feet on the ground and your hands together can be useful. And so I'm going to ask you to think about a time that you've been harmed. We're going to do this in a good way. First, it's important to know you don't have to think about the worst thing that's happened to you. Right? You can if you want to, but just remember that it's an invitation. We've all been harmed in small and great ways. And so it's important to choose what you feel comfortable with in this space. And before we go too far into that, let's take a moment to imagine in front of us someone who really cares about you. Someone invested in your safety, in your well-being, as if they're seated directly in front of you. And really take some time to sort of make their image crisp in your mind. So what does their hair look like? And what kind of clothes are they wearing? What's the expression on their face? And if you will, let's look into their eyes and just take a breath. And see if you can feel that person breathing with you, and let your breath fall into sort of a natural congruity. It need not be exactly with theirs, but you're breathing with this person and you're looking into their eyes. And now, as you're imagining this person and you're breathing, let's take some time to think about a time in which you were harmed. Again, be gentle with yourself as you choose. Just know that the person sitting in front of you knows that you're doing this exercise. They don't need to know what it is you're thinking about. Maybe they do. But they know you're thinking about a time in which you were harmed. And you can see on their face loving kindness, care, compassion, a deep desire that you not suffer. And in their face, you know that they have a sincere wish that you hadn't had to experience this in the first place, and that you never experience anything like that again. That is their wish for you. Now again, just be with your breath as you think about this event, this thing that has happened to you. And you can open your eyes if you have them closed. And take out your Post-it notes. And on your pink Post-it note, if you could write, what did you need when it happened? When you think back on the time that this event occurred in your life, or this series of events occurred in your life, without too much identifying information, right? You had a need. And it can be things like to have been heard, or someone to believe me, right? It doesn't tell the story. The need, you can write down needs without too much of the story. Does that make sense? Okay, so take some time on the pink Post-it notes to write some things you needed right around the time that the thing occurred. And you have a couple Post-it notes there. You can have multiple needs, but let's try to write down 2 or 3. Now we're going to do the next step, which is, again, to sort of get in touch with your breath. And think a little bit right now about what it is that you need now. What do you need today in relationship to this harm? Really imagine yourself receiving it. Like, what could be of benefit to you now? What would it look like for you to receive that now? In relationship to this thing that has happened today, what do you need? Oh, I'm so sorry. On the yellow now, Post-it notes. Write those things down. What you need today in relationship to the harm that you experienced. What is something today that you need in relationship to that harm? Okay, now I'm going to ask us to be in pairs with someone. So you want to look around the room. You can choose someone you know if you're with somebody you prefer to be with. And again, there's not going to be sharing of details of the harm. So there's going to be sort of a compassion exercise that we do together. Just choose someone, make eye contact with a person. You are so welcome to opt out if you want to. And I want us to really model consent in here. If somebody says, I'm going to pass, we're going to let them pass, okay? No pressuring people into this exercise. But I also warmly encourage you to stretch yourself a little bit. And choose a person that you're going to pair up with, okay? Yeah, if somebody's looking for someone, why don't you raise your hand? Anybody looking for someone? Is there anybody who still needs a person? We got 2 right here. Are you okay? I don't like pairing people up because I want people to, yeah. Great. Okay, so what we're going to do is you're going to start with your pink Post-it notes. And the person, choose a person to go first. And when you've chosen the person to go first, here's what the instructions are, and then you guys will do it, okay? The person who's going first is going to look at their Post-it note, then they're going to hold it outwards in silence, and the other person is going to see it. And you can reflect back to them something pretty neutral, such as, I wish that you had had that. Or if it's specific, mine says, to have been believed. You could say, I wish someone had believed you. Right? That kind of thing. Just very general. Okay? You guys got it? Okay, go for it. When you're done, if you've done it, you can switch. Do both your Post-it notes or all 3 of them. Or you can go back and forth, or you can all go all one, and you choose. So you can all work your way through both the yellow and the pink Post-it notes, either going back and forth, or you can do all of them, and then the other person can do all of them, whichever way you want to do it. When you're doing the yellow Post-it notes, you can try it also in the future tense, like, I'm hoping that happens for you. So if you haven't switched people yet, I know some people are totally done and some people are midway, so let's just make sure that at least both people got to do 1 or 2 Post-it notes.
Like I didn't want to hold it out because it was too much money. I wanted to.
All right, I'm going to bring us all back together. We're going to move on to the next part of our exercise. I know it's juicy. Thank you, good people. So we're going to move on to the next part of the exercise. It involves your blue Post-it notes. And let's start with the dark blue Post-it notes. And what we're going to do is we're going to repeat a version of that. And this time it's going to be about a time in which you've caused harm. And so what I want you to do is, again, I feel it. Good, I saw everybody breathing. It was like automatic. I need to take a deep breath about that. So again, it doesn't have to be the worst thing you ever did. It doesn't have to be the thing you're still feeling the most amount of shame about, whatever, But so be gentle with yourself about the things that you've done that have caused harm. And again, we're going to drop into our breath. And we're going to visualize somebody seated in front of us who really cares about you and who loves and respects you even when you've erred. And I forgot to say this in the last exercise. Sometimes it's hard to imagine that person in your immediate life, right? And so you might want to just imagine a more generic person, right? Like some criminal defense lawyer that just is so down for their clients and really respects their dignity, right? Even when their client did it, right? But treats them like a human, right? Your version of that person. Or maybe it's someone like Archbishop Desmond Tutu or the Dalai Lama, right? These are people who can lean in when you're telling them the worst things that they did, right? So, that you did. So, imagine your version of that person, or maybe somebody who you've just been able to confess something to once where they were cool. Right? So that person, imagine them in front of you. And so, again, really thinking about a time in which you've caused harm. And as you're letting yourself drop into your breath and letting your breath become congruous or in sync in some way with this person who's looking into your eyes and knows that you are doing this exercise. You see on their face, again, care, concern, loving kindness, and really a deep support of your willingness to look at what you've done. They don't need you to hide anything about this. And now really reflect on that thing that you did. And take yourself to that time when you did something that caused harm. It doesn't have to be a huge thing. And you might have to go way back. Maybe you were mean to someone in 3rd grade. Or maybe there is something more recent. And again, be gentle as you examine this thing. Now again, centering yourself in your breath and come back into the room. And take out your dark blue Post-it notes. And you're going to write on there a thing that you needed when you did this harm. You had needs at the time the harm occurred, right? So, without self-judgment, try to identify some things that you needed at the time that you caused harm. Maybe you got caught before, after you got caught, it doesn't matter, right? Just a thing you needed at the time you caused harm. And now let's do it again. Sort of thinking with the light blue Post-it notes, thinking about what it is you need now in relationship to this harm. What do you need now in relationship to this harm? What do you need now in relationship to this harm you caused? So now I'm going to ask you again to join up with your partner. And the exercise is the same. One of you chooses who goes first. And then you start with your dark blue Post-it notes and you hold them up. And the other person says, I wish you had had that. Or I wish that would have happened to you. Or I wish that would have happened for you. Or if you can be more specific based on what you see. And then with the light blue Post-it notes, you say, I hope that happens for you, or I hope the conditions arise for that to occur. You know, future still can happen, right? So go for it, folks. folks, when you're finished, it would be really great if you got up with your Post-it notes and came up front here and started to stick them onto these boards. And first walk around a little bit as you're starting to stick them on the boards and see what else is up there, and put your things with related concepts. Does that make sense? So like over here, I swear I didn't do this on purpose. This really showed up. I thought about two totally different things. And I say, to have someone to tell. And my other thing, when I did something wrong, I also wanted someone safe to tell what I did, right? So so these are needs that relate to one another. And so look and see, sometimes your needs are like really specific, and that's all right too, and they don't have to match anyone else's needs. We are allowed to have really specific needs. But let's see if we can cluster needs by concepts without concern for the color of your Post-its. Go with concepts and needs, not with the color of your Post-its, right? Does that make sense? Okay, great, go for it. And if there's not enough room, you may need to go out onto the walls. It doesn't all have to stay on the chalkboard. There's like space all over here people can use.
Sorry.
Anybody? I think that's me. Oh, thank you. I need white.
Ty, put this up there.
And when you're done, folks, take some time to look at everybody else's Post-its. Like do a little gallery walk and just take a couple minutes to see what got clumped together and what stands alone. Just really take a minute to peek at it. my favorite congruencies is to understand why it happened and to understand why I did it. Like, those two really move me. I love the really honest ones about the needs that were not healthy, right? Like, that's really beautiful when you see those. Like, that's some self-awareness, you know. Another layer of this exercise could be, with a smaller group of people, to put them together, like each person can take turns putting them together, moving them around to see where they, like, because people clump them in different ways, right? I noticed there's some words like forgiveness is like across the entire board, and you could just take all the forgiveness ones and put them in one part of the board. But maybe people meant slightly different things about forgiveness and and everyone has a completely different meaning of that word, which is why writing a book about it is no small challenge. So there's all kinds of layers of this. I think when you do this with your closest beloveds, to save the Post-it notes and to bring them out as conversation pieces when other things arise. Because sometimes we're replaying old patterns about old things we've done or had done to us, and sometimes these needs are there that can be attended to. You can also add another layer to this, which was, what did you need before it happened? You can ask this both of the person harmed and the person who's caused the harm. These are some different things that you can play with regard to this exercise. So, at this point, I'd love to open it up to conversations, questions. I'll just say really briefly, one last piece is a note on language. You might notice that I don't use words like offender, and I don't really use victim that much either. Sometimes there's a value politically to claiming as somebody who is working to end mass criminalization that I am also a victim, right? And there's a way in which I sometimes use that word when people say, well, the crime victims don't want blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, that would be me also. And I have a different view, and so sometimes politically I find it useful or sort of in the context of the thing. But generally, one of my favorite things about restorative justice is that it creates the possibility of transformation in the processes themselves. And like with meditative practices, we are looking to transform ourselves. These parallels are really obvious to me when I'm trying to breathe through a particularly heated part of a circle, and remembering that we are all changing, including myself in this moment while I'm holding the circle. And to that end, labels don't serve our work well. If I make you a certain thing or an X thing even, right? It still leaves the point of reference of your identity as the worst thing you ever did. And Brian Stevens speaks about this beautifully, and I would just add to what he says, none of us are the worst thing that we've ever done. We're all so much more than that. And that's true with regard to the worst things that have ever happened to us as well. I don't want to stay there for the rest of my life, and I don't live there, actually. 99% of the time these days, which is really great. Even though my life's work is entirely about me being a public survivor, right? I don't live there anymore. I really love, Eduardo Duran talks about in his language, which I really need to remember what it is. It's an indigenous language from this country, where he says there's more of a verb-like nature to identities. He says womaning is happening to her, is the way they would say it, instead of saying somebody's a woman. It's like that took my breath away when he said that, right? Or Justice Yazzie talks about, they don't have a word for offender in Diné, Navajo. They say someone is acting as if they have no family. I mean, when I think about my father and the sexual abuse we endured, and as an immigrant who was dissociated from his family, and he forgot that I was his family, he forgot that he had a family. Nobody in his family was watching him. He forgot his family's good name. He was acting as if he had no family. There was no family container holding us in a way that would have prevented that harm from happening. All the ways in which we were all acting as if we had no family is very powerful to me. And another, there's a woman, Sonia Shaw, worked on a report for the Zaire Institute, a really beautiful report on movements and restorative justice in the United States today. And one of the participants in those roundtables was from the Nisga'a Nation, And her name was Faith Tillett, I believe, and she said that instead of the word offender, they say that people are unhealed. Unhealed. So I think another way in which there's this nexus in the two parts of my life, which don't really feel like two parts of my life, is that, this is what I'm trying to do through my meditation processes, and to heal these notions of binary existence in our communities and within myself. And so those words really give me inspiration. So with that, I want to just open it up to folks. I know we spent a lot of time in the exercise. I hope that was beneficial. But yes, please.
I found it really amazing how the stranger...
Oh, you know what? Yeah, so you press a button with the hand and the little hand, and then you move the mic towards yourself, and the thing will turn green, apparently. Oh, maybe it's a microphone, not a hand. I'm sorry. There we go. It turns red.
Okay.
Okay, it's a mouth.
It's a what?
It's a mouth. It's a little mouth.
A mouth. Okay. Yes. Okay. I found it amazing that in just sharing, not the specifics, and hearing her be so compassionate in what she responded, how deeply touched I was by a stranger. Yes. So I ask you, when you suggested now we do this with our family, would you, I'm thinking to start with maybe something that had nothing to do with this other person.
Oh, that's a really important part of the instruction.
Okay.
Yeah, really important.
Okay.
Try this at home, but in a very particular way, right? Which is not to never use the harm that the person sitting in front of you has caused, or that you are entangled with that person in that harm. There are other harms. And it's a way of our humanizing ourselves and each other. One of my favorite things to do when my husband and I are fighting, we keep pictures of ourselves when we were 7 years old in a frame together. And when we're fighting, we do two things. We look at the pictures, and I literally try to visualize a little 7-year-old inside Jason, right? I see the 7-year-old Jason inside Jason. And then he has to do the same thing for me, right? And I pick things, when we're talking about this sort of stuff, from before Jason, actually, which is 22 years ago at this point, right? I had to think of stuff from back then. And I think that it's a way of us being able to feel the way, what are the kinds of needs that arise from us that are unrelated. Then it becomes like all enmeshed because like I need this from you, and then we're doing a dialogue around harm instead of just being present to the other person's harm. You can start to move in that direction, and one of the things I love so much is Thich Nhat Hanh's book called Anger. I would really strongly suggest that as a way of moving closer to being able to sit in front of someone when they're really mad at you, and you say things like, I see that you are suffering. I see that some of my actions have been the cause of your suffering, right? It doesn't matter whether I'm right or wrong, I just see that you're suffering and that my actions are a part of your suffering. Like, we can say those things to one another, right? But I think that these are easier ways in sometimes when stuff is really enmeshed and difficult. Yeah. But maybe get there. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with everything, I didn't start doing domestic violence cases and sexual violence cases and first-degree homicide cases. Like, that's not where I started with restorative justice, right? And I started with my 3-year-old son at the time and his friends who kept hitting each other over the head with a Tonka truck, right? And we sat in a circle and we started to ask questions about, like, what is a good friend? Not what's going on with this Tonka truck, but what makes for a good friend? And when is somebody not being a good friend? Let's not talk about the Tonka truck. What does it feel like when someone's, is hurting our feelings or, is hurting our body? Like, you can find your way in sideways sometimes. And we can be more present sometimes when it's not so. Yeah. Thank you. Uh-huh. Yes.
Do you think, in your opinion, is there a tension between the notions of forgiveness and the idea that a person isn't just, his or her one bad act, but also the desire to, never want to associate with that person again?
So one of the things I'm writing about is the difference between forgiveness and pardon, forgiveness and reconciliation, right? These are totally different things. If my father were alive today, it would really depend on how he continues to behave about whether or not first of all, whether or not I still harbor anger towards him, which I don't. So I'm working with a definition of of forgiveness that involves something it's too clunky right now, and it comes from a few different sources that I'm smushing together. But it's an intra-individual relinquishment of hatred, anger, the right to retribution and revenge towards a perceived transgressor. Like, it doesn't matter whether or not you did or not. I could be harboring anger towards you, whether or not somebody else did, and I think it's you, right? And I let go of that anger for a very specific act, right? So I can let go of my anger towards my father for having sexually abused me, but I'm still really pissed about how he treated my mom, actually, right? So, but I've forgiven him for this thing. And it's very discreet, and it's the release of this relinquishment of anger, hatred, right to retribution, and revenge. But that doesn't mean I'm going to hang out with him. It doesn't mean that I would leave him alone with my child, right? Like, and that's not from a place of anger. That's just pragmatic, right? The Dalai Lama doesn't harbor hatred and anger towards Chinese officials who he, experienced incredible harm from. He doesn't harbor that anger, but he's not moving back to Tibet, right? And we talk a lot with survivors of domestic violence about this. Some people can continue to cohabitate. Some people cannot, right? And that doesn't have to be related to how much anger, hatred, rage you continue to feel. Those can be separate experiences. Yeah. Yes?
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I wanted to ask, I think as restorative justice is kind of increasingly a recognized term and a bit more of a buzzword more and more, I think a lot of folks, I work in sexual violence and organizing the field as well, kind of have this idea that the golden goose is the victim-offender dialogue, and if you're that's what people hear about, that's what people want, and if they recognize that perhaps the person who caused harm isn't ready to take accountability, that there is nothing for me here. And although we know that that's not the case, there's still so much hurt and disappointment when folks kind of hear about this potential alternative and recognize it might not be an option for them, not because they're not ready, but because the other party is not ready. So what advice do you give to those folks, particularly with sexual harm and intimate partner violence? That is the cases that I hear about most. When folks are ready, they've actually gone through this journey of becoming ready, and it's not an option to move towards any type of conferencing.
Yeah. I never work with if a survivor reaches out to have a restorative justice process, I try not to go too far down the road of readying them for the dialogue until I've actually worked with the person who's harmed. And I tell them that up front. I think that's a really, really important practice piece. Most of my work is not actually victim-initiated, particularly around the youth diversion work we do. It's the DAs have a category of cases that they're going to automatically send to restorative justice, and we reach out to that young person first, actually, to determine their capacity to take responsibility and start to build the family and community capacity to be directly accountable to their survivor, and then we go talk to the person who was harmed and say, hey, and then we don't even talk about restorative justice. Our instruction is to say, what do you need, and da-da-da, and the DA sent our case here. We don't even really talk too much about face-to-face dialogues, because it is a golden goose, and something might fall apart over here that then, so how do we, and there's so many other things that crime survivors need. And I think Susan Herman did some really great work around thinking about parallel justice. But I think that we need to think about restorative justice more broadly, because healing circles for survivors with their own family members can be the thing that they actually needed, way more than they needed accountability from this person, right? And some people may want that, right? And I'm always asking, and what else do you need? And if that can't happen, what are other things that can attend to your needs, right? So when the cases are diverted, when they've brushed up against the system, we do work pre-charge on the youth diversion side of things. When they're brushed up against the system, then there is this sort of way in which the state's looming potential capacity to charge people with crimes, right? Then definitely means that there's some incentive out of fear of being involved in the system that people who've caused harm are more likely to participate. I think that's an unfair advantage of partnering with the state, where transformative justice processes really it relies on the strength of community to haul that person in there or hold people to community norms, which I actually think is a preferable approach, but not always easy to accomplish. So So to my mind, it really is about never getting survivors' hopes up, about what a process is, or even holding anything forward as the golden goose. Like, we don't know when we talk with survivors what they want, and they may not want a face-to-face dialogue. And if we tell them, all the things that we know, wonderful that we have data now that says, like, PTSD is reduced if you talk to them face-to-face, and crime survivors have a 91% satisfaction rate with restorative justice. It's all true, right? That's great, but it's not always available, so.
Yeah, thank you. I've seen so many folks kind of lose interest when you talk about other aspects of responses on the continuum that are not this kind of New York Times covered conversation, like healing circles and community circles. People are like, okay. But,
Well, I actually think that we use those actually as prerequisites in a sense to get all the way there. Like, if you don't have, so I don't do victim offender dialogues, particularly in sexual and intimate partner violence, because I think that it recreates the same power dynamics that existed. So we actually need lots of eyes in the room. We worked really hard in our movements to end sexual and domestic violence to not have the state ignore these and to say this is actually a public matter, right? And at the same time, we have to honor survivors' needs for privacy and safety, and that these are matters that happen in intimate relationships, but we do actually have to bring family and community in to continue to hold space. So I don't do VODs, I do conferencing and circles and other things like that, and I think that's the preferable approach. If there's not some other like state mechanism that may or may not produce safety, but that's there too. Yeah. Yes.
What do we need to teach our children about forgiveness? And how do we do it in the moment? So, you have the sibling that punches the other sibling in the face for the first time when they're little. What's the next step? What does that look like? And what is I heard you talk before about the Tonka Crack story, and you have an abstract conversation, but in the moment where something has just happened and it's clear one to the other, would you do this? Do you do the 3 questions? What do you do?
Yeah, so great question. And as you're talking, I realize I don't talk to my son about forgiveness at all. I've actually never talked to my son about forgiveness. That is so interesting. And I think it's because, I often say, so restorative justice and forgiveness are distinct things. And, restorative justice, I can't think of a better cauldron for cooking up some forgiveness than a successful restorative justice process. You get to say what happened, you get somebody else taking responsibility for it, there's amends that are made, and there's a plan to repair the harm, and then at the end you might be like, oh look, I'm not angry anymore, right? All my work around forgiveness is forgiveness workshops for people who are interested in forgiving themselves, being forgiven, forgiving themselves, forgiving others, right? That this is, so in the moment I don't really think about forgiveness, I think about accountability and safety. And when we produce accountability and safety, then forgiveness may arise. And later if you're harboring anger, that's when forgiveness seems interesting to me. And the moment, I think that anger, like I said, is a really healthy response to somebody hitting you over the head with a Tonka truck, right? That's not okay, right? So then to me, I think that when forgiveness comes too quickly, that it's often brushing stuff under the carpet. Some people have a spontaneous instant. I know people who have been like, I have a friend who woke up from a coma and realized what had been done to him and said, I need to forgive those children, and went back into his coma and woke up 4 days later, and I'm like, this is for real, and he lives with a permanent head injury from a horrible robbery gone bad, and then spent the rest of the next, like, who's the guy who did this to me? How do I reach out to him? Went and spoke at his sentencing, told him he forgave him in court, and I believe it is completely, and everybody's like, that was the head injury, and I'm like, no, that's really him, that's really who that dude is, and everyone who knew him before the head injury says so, right? And some people will have that experience, but I don't believe in instantaneous forgiveness. I think it's a messy road for most of us. About when are you ready? So the punchline of my book, really, and I've talked about it a lot publicly, is when I was asking the Dalai Lama for some very specific advice about how to forgive my father for the decade of sexual abuse I endured, His Holiness wouldn't give me an answer. And at a certain point, I just kept drilling him. I was like, no, but how did you forgive the Chinese government? How do you forgive ongoing atrocity? How do you? And he stopped it, because I told him what I had experienced. And he said, do you feel you've been angry long enough? I was like, whoa. Like the Dalai Lama is asking me. I'm like, he's a forgiveness guy. Like, isn't the answer supposed to be yes? And I could totally tell from his face that it wasn't like he was judging my dad or anything. He's like, you're 24 years old and your father sexually abused you for a decade. Like, are you really done with are you really ready to be done with your anger? That's and we sat there and surveyed anger's diminishing returns on my life. And I came up with the answer of yes, like anger is completely destroying me. I need to figure out how to get past this. And then he gave me some advice. But, and it was advice that was specific to me, and I will be sharing in the book, and it may or may not work for other people, and that is like, I just feel like we peddle forgiveness. And it's all the harms are too complex to do that.
I think we have time for one more.
Yeah. Please. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for all of this. I just wanted to, you mentioned that in the restorative justice circle, you're holding the space. And, and that's something that you're doing in terms of your meditative stance, I presume, at least to some part. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if there's another element, because as a mediator I try to do the same thing, and I was wondering if there's another element that you might talk about if it exists for you, which is using mindfulness, and I guess these are ways to do it, but a little bit more about how you allow the participants to mindfully engage in the process and encourage them to do that.
So I'm a little cautious about it because it doesn't, so different ways of being present in our bodies and in the space can be actually dysregulating for some folks. Some people find breathing meditation to be really challenging. Some people find, it depends on what your issues are, right? Like that you're bringing into the circle, and the issues sounded pathologizing. It's more like different approaches feel good to people in different ways. And so if I use breathing as an opening, which is what I usually do, I keep it very short. I try to do other kinds of somatic things, like let's notice our bodies and let's maybe do a gentle stretch as you're comfortable, and other ways to bring yourself into the room. I ask people if they want to do breathing. I check in preparation for breathing, and it takes months sometimes to bring people together. I check with people about what do you want the opening to be? What do you want the closing to be? When we take a break, what do you want? And at those points, can I bring some of those things? If they don't know, then I can suggest, and they can be, oh my God, that sounds crazy, I don't want to do that. Or they can be like, yeah, that sounds really great. From a facilitator perspective too, I do, my secret is that the whole time I am doing some kind of just regulating myself through my breath, or sometimes I'm doing visualizations, I'm doing different things that hold the spaces, particularly when in circle and the talking piece is going around, and sometimes it takes a really long time, right? What am I going to do to ground myself when people are saying and hearing really hard things? And I use it as a practice for myself. I also encourage people to figure out what practices they're going to have for themselves coming into the circle to be able to hear and to be physically present. That's some of the things that I do. Yeah.
Are there any kind of awareness practice like you would have in Mahamudra or Dzogchen, where you're setting somebody like in a kind of witnessing position or a position of presence where where you're exploring with them how that presence is untouched by what happens, so that it can be more, there's more of an embrace?
So that would be more things that I do in my forgiveness workshops and less that I do in restorative justice. And I wonder a lot whether or not for me as a South Asian woman that I've actually shied away from bringing some more of the sort of original approaches, like Dzogchen, Mahamudra, other things I've been trained in, into this work. And it's interesting, I was in India for the month of January and meeting with different Rinpoches talking about how can I do this in a good way? I'm not an instructor, right? And we don't, in Tibetan lineages, we don't you have to go get your Geshe degree and all of these things, right? I'm just baby Buddhist. I've been practicing for 25 years as a layperson, I'm a baby Buddhist, right? And so, so I'm trying to be thoughtful about how you introduce these things, and some of them are really powerful techniques that actually might, do I want to open up another thing when I am, right? Just being at a Mahamudra retreat can really open you up. Trying to figure out how we're watching our minds in relationship to it just feels like I'm mixing in something that, as a restorative justice practitioner, I am about what they need. I am responding to them. I'm not inserting anything. I am creating a space in which their stories, their community, their needs, our are being held in a way that they get to bring their full selves. I don't add a thing, right? It's only when there's like total confusion about what's needed, then I might suggest some breath observation. That's about as far as I go. Yeah. Okay, so we're out of time, over time, but really appreciate all of you and your thoughtful questions. Thank you all so much.